बनाया हुआ है तुमने, तो मैं देखता हूँ मेरे पास, मेरे ख्याल में शायद बटन हो।
नहीं, हो गया, शुरू हो गया डॉक्टर साहब।
अच्छा,
वो क्लाउड पे कर लिया चले मैंने।
चलो। मुझे तो शो नहीं कर रहा है कि रिकॉर्डिंग हो रही। नॉर्मली एक बटन आ जाता था शोइंग की रिकॉर्डिंग हो रही है।
नहीं, हो रही है, हो रही है। मैं
चलो,
इसको ब्रॉडकास्ट भी कर दूं, बस फिर हम शुरू करते हैं। Right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Doctor, I think you can start now.
ऑलराइट, ठीक है, शुरू कर दूं मैं।
Right.
हेलो,
जी डॉक्टर साहब, let's start.
ठीक है। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम एंड अस्सलाम वालेकुम। वेलकम टू ऑल for this, what was supposed to be the last lecture, but actually it got quite long, so Brother Moise persuaded me to split this into two, so we will be having the second part in next week, inshallah. So I will start with this lecture, first part of lesson 8, and the title for this is the Ghazali Project, 3 Steps for Islamic Revival. So in this, actually, we will sort of put everything together. And so actually the 3 steps are the 3 steps that Imam al-Ghazali himself took. And there are 3 books that he wrote. One was called Deliverance from Error, and Munqidh min al-Dalal, and then Tahafut al-Falasifa, and then Ahya Ulumuddin. So these 3 form a sequence of steps that we need to take. But first we must understand what the problem is. So the problem is actually the problem of the modern Mu'tazila. I have remade the slides and I'm getting the wrong ones. I think I will start this over with the right slides because they are slightly better organized. Give me a minute to download the correct slides. All right, sorry for the delay. I'm back on the right set of slides. And so we are talking about the central problem is that of the modern Mu'tazila. So what is the modern Mu'tazila? First, we have to discuss the ancient Mu'tazila. And the ancient Mu'tazila were overly impressed by Greek philosophy. They were simple Bedouin, the early Muslims, and when they first encountered this system of thought, they were really blown away. The philosophy was deep, difficult, complex. They had never encountered anything like this before, and they were just enormously impressed. So, the light of Islam got blocked by the Greek philosophers. What the Mu'tazila said, the ancient Mu'tazila said that Greek philosophy is just aql, it is reason, it is intellect. And this aql is on par with the Quran. It's equal to the Quran. Why? Because we use aql to understand the Quran. So aql in some sense comes first, and then we can understand the Quran. Without aql, we cannot understand the Quran. So people pointed out that Greek philosophy has lots of errors in it. So said all creations are imperfect, and including they said the Quran was also the creation of God, and therefore it was subject to death. So this was a strategy used to put Aql or Greek philosophy on par with the Quran. The Mu'tazila almost succeeded in making this the Orthodox Islam. The philosophy of Mu'tazila became the state religion and was enforced on everybody, and including the ulama. They were forced to declare their allegiance to it, or they would be tortured. The mihna was the and only a few people, like I think Imam Abu Hanifa also went through torture because he didn't accept the Mu'tazila position. So actually Allah Ta'ala protected his deen according to his promise. Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Now, in the modern times, this event has been misrepresented by secular modern Muslims, and they say that the defeat of the Mu'tazila was the rejection of aql by Muslims, because that's what it sounds like. But this is not really true. It was, and especially Ghazali was very important in this project, and as we will discuss. So they said, so Ghazali put Muslims on a track where they rejected aql, and Islam has never recovered. This is just ridiculous. Actually, what happened was that in Christianity, a similar thing happened. They accepted the teachings of Aristotle, and Christianity tied itself to Aristotle. When the Middle Ages, when the light from Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, flooded Europe, then the Catholic Church censored these writings and banned these writings, and it issued an edict that nobody could publish anything which had views contrary to Aristotle. And this made it very impossible to develop science because Aristotle's position was rather anti-scientific. And the teachings of Muslims, Ibn al-Haytham, al-Ghazali, etc., they were the basis, Ibn Sina and many others, but they were the basis for the science. So there was a massive conflict as people tried to accept these scientific writings from Islamic civilization, and the church tried to suppress these writings. And ultimately, this battle was lost by Christianity and ended up with people losing their faith. So, if we had accepted the Mu'tazila position, then today Islam would also be rejected because mixed in with Islam would be Greek philosophies, and all of the Greek philosophies have proven to be wrong. So now today we face with a similar problem. The modern Mu'tazila say that all the teachings of the West are on par with or even superior to the Quran. So whenever they see a conflict between the teachings of the West and the teachings of the Quran, then what they do is they accept the teaching of the West and they reinterpret the Quran. So one striking example of this is that economic theory is based on Jeremy Bentham's religion, which he explicitly invented to replace Christianity. He said, the Christian theory of morals is completely wrong, and I'm going to define a new basis for morality, and that's just pleasure and pain. Anything which gives you pleasure is good and moral, anything which gives you pain is bad and evil. So obviously, this is actually the religion of worship of the nafs, and Muslims should have recognized this, and Islamic economics should have been built on different foundations. But this is not what happened, because nobody had the courage to reject modern economics because it's so dazzling with all this mathematics and fancy equations and so on. They said, oh, this must be right. So they said, okay, since they teach that everyone maximizes pleasure, the Quran also says the same thing. And they took this verse as evidence that Quran also teaches utility maximization. So this is just one example. In economics, there are at least 10 different places where economics principles are directly counter to Islamic principles. But Islamic economists accepted those principles and said that, okay, like scarcity, they accepted and agreed that, okay, Islam also teaches the same thing. And then they had to work hard to find some support for these ridiculous views in the Quran and the Hadith. So this is the problem, that the modern Mu'tazila say that the Western knowledge is on par with the Quran. So the solution which Ghazali found to the problem of the ancient Mu'tazila is based on three different steps, based on three books that he wrote. One of them is Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the Deliverance from the Error. The second one is Tahafatul Falasifa, and the third one is Ahya Ulumuddin. So today I will go through the first step, and the second and the third step are for the next lecture. So in the time of the Imam al-Ghazali, there were many different claimants to knowledge. There were four different parties that he identified, all of whom claimed to have knowledge. So he said, okay, I will study all of the people who are the seekers of knowledge, because the truth must be somewhere among them. If none of the people who are seeking knowledge today have any knowledge, then we are lost. We can't, we have to start from zero, and that seems like a very difficult thing to do. So that's a very sensible place. So he says, let's start from a position of complete ignorance. That is, I don't know anything. I'm not certain of anything. How can I get to knowledge? So he said that we should look for the ways of the people who are searching for knowledge and judge. So he said that there are four approaches to knowledge which he could find at that time. And one of that was of the theologians, the mutakallimûn, and the other was the Ismailis at that time, who said that we are followers of teachers who are infallible. So the Imam, whatever he says, that is the truth and that is knowledge. And then there were the philosophers, who were the people who were actually closest to our secular modernized Muslims. They say that the Western knowledge is the way. And so the philosophers said that the Greek philosophy is the path. And then there was the mystics, the Sufis. So there were these four approaches to knowledge that Imam Ghazali identified in his time. So he analyzed all four of them one by one. So the first one was the approach of the theologians. Basically, if you think back to the Christians, when the battle took place between Christianity and science, there was a field invented which was called apologetics. And what the apologetics did was exactly what the secular modern Muslims are doing, that they were aligning Christianity with science. Whenever the science would come up with some finding which was against the official position of the church, then they would reinterpret the position of the church to align it with science. So basically, they were trying to adjust Christianity to match with the science. So the Ash'aris at that time were engaged in very much the same thing. They were aligning Islam with Greek philosophy. They were not as in a bad position as the Christians. So they would argue against Greek philosophy when they found it convenient, but also they would make use of Greek philosophy. So Al-Ghazali was trained in the Ash'ari tradition, and he had inside knowledge of what the Ash'aris are trying to do. And basically the goal of the Ash'aris was to defend faith against Greek philosophy. So these were called the mutakallimûn, the Ash'ari apologetics, and they were basing their arguments on four different principles. They assumed that the people had naive belief. Naive belief is just simple-minded, simple faith. The mutakallimun were countering the Greek arguments on their own grounds, and they were appealing to community consensus. Everybody believes this, and they were taking the Quran and Hadith as certain truths, and they were using this to argue against the Greeks. So this was a problematic approach, because if you want to, you can take the position, it is not wrong to say that I believe in Islam and I'm not concerned about philosophy. That is fine, there is no problem. If you are a simple person and you can't understand philosophy, it's very good for you. The Prophet ﷺ praised this kind of belief, which is just simple belief without any complications of philosophy. But if you start trying to counter Greek arguments, then you are not able to. That means when you start countering, that means you have accepted some part of it. And that was actually true. Once you accept, then you cannot rely on community consensus, and you cannot even take Quran and Hadith as certain truths, because once you're attacking Greek arguments, then you can say, then other people who are with the philosopher, they can say that, well, you have these beliefs, but other communities have other beliefs. So the community of Christians has different beliefs, and the community of Jews has different beliefs. So if you start attacking Greeks on their own grounds, then you cannot take these positions anymore. So so basically, then you have to accept, once you start attacking seculars, then you have to do it on their own grounds, and that is a very difficult problem. So this is the same problem that secular moderns are facing, that they give away too much to the West. They say, okay, and then they are unable to re-establish the truth of. Basically, the problem that they face is that let's accept the secular modern position, which is that we are using rational and empirical reasoning, and use the rational and empirical reasoning to establish Islam. But this cannot be done, as Al-Ghazali discovered. So the second approach was that of the Greek philosophers and the Muslim followers. And this was one of the important contributions of Al-Ghazali. He identified 20 errors in the writings of the Greek philosophers. Among them, there were three which were central. And these three are also similar to issues that are arising today. So he said that, there is lots of Greek philosophers deal with mathematics, with logic, with politics, with ethics, natural science. All of these are fine, and they are very bright and brilliant. But the real issue which concerns us here, when it comes to deen, is metaphysics. Metaphysics is what goes beyond physics. Physics is what you can see of the world, natural world. And metaphysics is what you cannot see, like God and angels and afterlife, etc. So he said that people get over-impressed by this mathematics and logic, and they say that whatever they say on metaphysics must be right. But actually, these fields of mathematics, logic, natural science, they do not matter for metaphysics. These are not going to lead us. Any knowledge of the seen and knowledge of logic will not enable us to get to the knowledge of God. So the philosophers deny that there will be resurrection, and they deny that they deny that God interferes in human affairs. They say that God created universal laws, but they don't, God does not interfere. And they argue that the universe is eternal. It has always existed and will always exist. Now, these things are parts of the Greek metaphysics, but they do not follow from logic. They are just taken as axiomatic. And the same thing is true today. Today, physics does not say anything about what God can do or what God cannot do, and does not say anything about the resurrection. Physics, they cannot prove what will happen after death. It's just not part of the domain of physics. And the universe is eternal was taken for granted by the scientists until, to great surprise of scientists, they found that this is not true, and the universe actually originated at some point in time, some maybe 12, 13 billion years ago. So that was a major surprise. Universe is not eternal. So one of the assumptions of the Greek was that knowledge, this is definition of knowledge, knowledge must be certain. We must be able to, we must be sure of what we are saying. Now, you cannot be sure that there is no resection. You cannot be sure, you cannot prove that universe is timeless. You cannot prove that universal laws hold without any exceptions at all times. And there is a problem in philosophy of science that we only get to see specific events. We see an apple falling. From this, can we deduce that there is a law of gravity and that it holds at all places at all times? How can you go from looking at a finite and a small number of observations to the derivation of universal laws? This is called the problem of induction, and it has never been solved. So basically, even though people, ancient and modern scientists, all confidently assert that there are universal laws, that the Galileo's law of gravitation is universal, but there is no proof of this. It's just that we have observed some phenomena which uh, give the idea that this is probably true. So what is happening is that there is something which is called signetism. There is science and then there is signetism. Signetism is the belief in faith that the science is just wonderful and it is certain, it has solutions to all problems, and it will expand to give us all knowledge about everything. And this is just a faith in science, and there is nothing you can prove about this. So there is this book which is called Einstein's Greatest Mistake. And basically, it's a very interesting episode. When Einstein calculated the general relativity equation, it showed that the universe was expanding. And therefore, it also showed that since it's expanding, if you go backwards in time, it was shrinking. And if it's shrinking, then it must have shrink down to a single point. So that's very surprising, because if that shows, according to Einstein's calculation, that there was a point when universe was not there and then it came into being, then that immediately raises the question of who created the universe. And this problem remains exactly in this form today. Nobody has an answer to who created the universe, and universe was created is known. So that's why the scientists all believed that the universe was eternal, because they could not, if universe is not eternal, then they are faced with the problem of explanation, how to explain the birth of the universe. So Einstein said that, well, this cannot be true, my equations, because they mean that the universe must have been born. So he corrected the equation by putting in an ad hoc correction term, which was an unexplainable attractive factor which would prevent the universe from expanding. So it said that there is some sort of a mysterious force which keeps things together so they don't keep expanding, and so the universe is balanced. Then Hubble discovered through his telescope that the universe is actually expanding, and Einstein actually went there to look with his own eyes to see, because he couldn't believe it. And once he found that this was true, then he realized that his original equation was correct and there was no need for the correction factor, and he called it his greatest mistake. Later on, as physics progressed and quantum mechanics came into view, he stubbornly held on to his old theories, which were not quite incompatible with these new coming quantum theories. And he was so stubborn that eventually his colleagues rejected him, and he died lonely and with no one, because his colleagues rejected his ideas. He was a has-been. So one of the things that this shows is that the greatest scientists are subject to mistakes, and science is subject to errors. So you can't assign, science does not lead to certainties, and the greatest scientists can make the greatest mistakes. So this is just for philosophy of science also establishes that science does not lead to certain truths. So the third problem is the third approach to knowledge is Taqleed of Infallible Imam. And now Shaykh al-Ghazali has a lot of things to say about that. He studied this problem in detail, and he has lots of arguments, but I will not go through them in detail. He said that these people have made men the standard of truth instead of truth as the standard of man. So instead of using, so basically they rely on authority, but the problem is that all men are fallible, subject to mistakes, except for our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then people said that, what about our Prophet? If all men are fallible, then can it not be that he is also fallible? Maybe he also made mistakes. So to this, Imam al-Ghazali said that you make the experiment, try it out, find it for yourself. Look at his teachings, apply them in your life, and see if they lead to a problem. So Imam Ghazali realized that Taqleed cannot lead to the truth. And he said that Taqleed is actually very harmful because it's second-hand belief. You don't actually believe in yourself, in the truth of the belief from your experience. You believe because somebody else says so. And this is different from naive belief, the simple belief in the heart that there is a God without any XYZ, without any arguments and without any authority. This is perfectly acceptable, but second-hand belief is not. And so he said that man is born on Deen al-Fitra, but his parents make him Jew or Christian. That means that, this is the hadith, that means that people can be trained away. So if you are following some leader who is not infallible, then he can lead you away from the truth, just like the Christians and the Jews lead people away from the truth. So what we need to do is to discover what is the fitrah, because the fitrah is the Islam. So basically Imam al-Ghazali rejected all of these three books, all of these three approaches in his book Al-Munqidh min al-Dhalal, which is also available in translation in English, and I will put a copy on the website. And then he said, okay, the fourth approach is the Sufi approach, but the Sufis say that you cannot arrive at this knowledge by reading books. So basically, I will just follow a translation of Imam al-Ghazali and look at his own quotes about this path. So he says that the only path to yaqeen, certainty, is by direct experience of God. So he said that my own experience, by thinking and by experience, actually the book describes how he fell into doubt. And he said that he became actually psychologically ill. He could not teach, he could not speak. And then he said, Allah Ta'ala delivered me from this state. And he reassured me. And so basically, he came back to believing that, you see, he said that he came to the conclusion first in the stage of doubt that even if I see something in front of me, my eyes can deceive me. So I'm not certain of anything. So then he said that Allah Ta'ala relieved me of this doubt, and I came back to trust my senses and my aql. And he came to the realization that the Sufi claim that knowledge can only be acquired by direct experience, he decided to test this. So after spending years, 10 years in the path of the Sufis, he came to the conclusion that the unveiling of the truth, the approach to truth, does not depend on proofs and reason. And so he supports this. This is all quotations from the book, that there is hadith that whoever Allah Ta'ala wants to guide, he opens his breast, in sharah of the breast, for the submission. So what is this sharah sadr? So it is a light which Allah Ta'ala casts into the heart. And in the hadith it says, what is the sign of it? That you withdraw from this house of delusion and turn you towards the house of immortality. That is, the turn away from the dunya and turn towards the akhirah. And another hadith is that Allah Ta'ala created man in darkness, and then he sprinkled some of his nur. So we must seek this nur in order to arrive at the truth. And there is a hadith that Allah Ta'ala spends his light, and so from time to time, so we must be on the lookout for this nur so as to catch it for ourselves. So once he came to this realization, and he said that I looked at my own circumstances, and I saw that I was attached to this dunya from all sides. I considered my activities, the best of them was teaching in public and in private. And I saw that I was teaching useless things and unimportant things and wasting my time. And I looked at my intention. This is Imam al-Ghazali, and I saw that it was not sincerely for Allah, but it was motivated by the quest for fame and prestige. So I became certain that I was on the verge of hellfire and I should correct myself. And that is when he set out on the path to certainty, which is the obtained by the experience of God, which he achieved. So now we are going to talk about this path. So there is this hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam. It's hadith Qudsi, that Islam, there are 3 stages on the path towards Allah. The first stage is Islam, which is the affirmation of Tawheed. Allah is one, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is messenger, and that we should pray 5 times and fast and zakah and do the pilgrimage, Hajj. So because of our training in the West, this sequence seems reversed. The second stage is belief, Iman, and that is belief in God and the angels and the books and the messengers and the day of judgment. So because we have been trained that first you must believe, then you must act. So we think that there is something wrong about this, that the stages are first we acquire belief, then we will act according to the belief. But actually the reality is the reverse. First we start acting, and then the acts lead to the belief. So, and as we strengthen the belief, then this eventually leads to the stage of ihsan, which is to live my life as Allah Ta'ala is watching. So this is the direct experience of God, that when I'm choosing, making a choice, I'm asking Allah Ta'ala, what should I do? And Allah Ta'ala tells me that this is what you should do. So this is the direct experience of God. So what does this direct experience mean? Because we have been trained to use aql too much, and we have not been trained to use the heart. But the heart is very much an instrument of knowledge, and there are so many ahadiths about the heart and the importance of the heart. And ja'ala lakum as-sam'a wal absar al-afida, that we have given you these 3 faculties, the eyes, the ears, and the heart, to search for the truth. And then there is hadith, the Quran says that they have hearts, وَلَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have we have given them hearts, but they don't use them to think. So one of the very clear descriptions of the stage of ihsan is in this Surah Shura. And it starts with Wadlu alayhim Naba Ibrahim. And it says that Ibrahim alayhi salam asked his father and his people, who do you worship? So they said, we worship idols. So he said, do they hear you when you call them? Can they benefit you or they harm you? They said, no. But we found our fathers were doing the same thing. So we are just following blindly the tradition. So he said, have you really thought about this tradition? And then he starts describing that these people are just, these other gods are just misdirecting you. And they are taking you away from God. And the only true God is the one who created me, and he alone guides me. So now he is describing his relationship with God here. And he is the one, when I'm eating and I'm drinking, then I should be conscious that this food is given to me by Allah, by the seed which went into the ground. How did it learn how to open up? How did it learn which direction to send the root and which direction to the shoot? This was all the ilham of Allah. So every single piece of wheat that I have is a gift from Allah. So Allah Ta'ala heals me when I am sick, and Allah Ta'ala is the one who will give me death and will bring me back to life, and he is the one who I hope will forgive my flaws on the day of judgment. Now you see, as Ibrahim alayhi salam is talking more and more about God, he is becoming more and more conscious about God. And now he is talking to his people, and he has said that he is thinking about judgment day, that I will die and I will be raised up. And then he has this hope from Allah that Allah Ta'ala will forgive me on judgment day. So now we see the ihsan here, that suddenly the surah shifts, and instead of talking to his people, in the middle of this speech, he started addressing his Rabb. He says, that, Ya Allah, habli hukman wa alhiqni bis salihin. So now, instead of talking to people, he's forgotten about the people. He's having an argument with the people, explaining to them about God. Then suddenly, now he is in front of his God, and he's talking to his God. Oh Allah, give me wisdom and make me among the righteous people, and give me good mention among the later generations, and make me among the warisin of the Jannat al-Na'im, and forgive my father, and do not disgrace me. So suddenly all of this is directly talking to God. So this is basically the state of ihsan in which Ibrahim alayhi salam has demonstrated. Note one more very important thing here. It starts by saying Ibrahim alayhi salam talks to the people, and he says that, look, what do your gods do? Do they talk? Do they listen to you? Do they answer your prayers? So the people say no. So notice how he is differentiating between Allah Ta'ala and the false goods. The difference between the false gods and Allah Ta'ala listens to me when I talk to him, and he answers my prayers. So this is essential for us to know. If we don't experience this difference, then we do not have this characteristic, and it is essential, because then we cannot differentiate between Allah Ta'ala and a but if Allah Ta'ala doesn't listen to us and doesn't answer us. So that's why direct experience of God is one of the essential characteristics of faith. The key here is, there's a hadith that the people of paradise will not have any regrets except for the moments in which they were not engaged in the zikr of Allah, in the remembrance of Allah. So if I think about my life, then the number of moments in which I have remembered Allah is very few, and most of life has been spent in ghafla. And there's a second hadith similar to this one, that if we forget about Allah, this will be a source of regret for us on the day of judgment. So we must try our best to remember Allah Ta'ala at all times. So Allah Ta'ala says, فَاذْكُرُونِي يَذْكُرُكُمْ وَاشْكُرُوا لِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ. So if I remember Allah, Allah Ta'ala remembers me. So this is really, we are in direct communication with God, and when we remember Allah from our heart, Allah Ta'ala will remember us. And if we make advance in our spirituality, we will be able to feel this remembrance of Allah. And so we will be able to experience the answering of our prayers with Allah. One very important thing to understand is that yaqeen, certainty, is a state of the heart. It is not of the mind. It is not something that we can argue and we can use logic and we can come to some conclusion about it. It is only achieved by when the heart senses that it is being answered by Allah, when the heart pleads with Allah, and when the heart senses that Allah Ta'ala is answering. So, the first step towards this consciousness of God, which is required of us, is to practice the continuous remembrance of Allah. We have du'as for all occasions, dua for waking up, for wuzu, for concentrating before the salat, for full attention in the salat, for eating, for drinking, for buying, for selling, for greeting others, for all occasions. So from moment to moment, we should remember these du'as and we should ask Allah Ta'ala for guidance on what we should be doing next. In particular, for the big decisions, we have istikhara and istishara. These are important ways to ask Allah Ta'ala for His help and guidance in making our decisions of life. So, finally, that's basically all I wanted to say about step one, although there is a lot of detail that needs to be filled in, but the steps 2 and 3 of this will be for the next lecture. And step 2 is about the Tahafutul Falasifa, rejection of Western knowledge. And the step 3 is about Ahya Ulumuddin, which is the revival of the religious sciences, and which involves how does Islam guide us to the solution of our modern problems. So these are the 2 steps for the next lecture. And the final thing that we want to end this lecture on is that this is the dua which we customarily read before the prayers. Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal ardi hanifa wa ma ana min al-mushrikin. This is to focus our complete attention on Allah Ta'ala, and then to note that inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mati lillahi rabbil, everything I do is for the sake of Allah Rabbul Alameen. So these are the words, but when we are in prayer, we practice this complete concentration and devotion to Allah Ta'ala. We seal off all our other objects of attention, and we try to practice being in the presence of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in order to concentrate, in order to practice for how we should live our lives. Actually, this salat is focus on Allah, and it's a practice for how to live the rest of our lives. The times we are not in salat, we should also be focused and concentrated solely on Allah. So this is the first step, the deliverance from the error. And the other 2 steps will be part of the next lecture. So I think I will end this here, and we will.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Rahman, for the lecture. We are open for questions now. Anyone who wants to ask a question can raise their hands. We'll have like 25 minutes for question and answers.
So I see a hand by Ahmed.
Please go ahead, Ahmed.
Yes, Ahmed Mabruk.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khair for the lecture. I just need a clarification regarding a simple specific point. You said that if you argue using the Greek logic, you have to share some ground with them. Well, actually, the most important part of the Greek logic is syllogism, which is they have two muqaddimah, two premises, and they combine them together and come up with something else. And this is basically now lend itself to symbolic logic, where A, B, C, and you basically combine it. So it is very systematic approach for concluding something out of two pieces of information. And that is basically what Imam al-Ghazali tried to instill into the theology or into the علوم في المتكلمين, because before him they didn't used to resort to Greek philosophy at all. Like when we read the books of Imam al-Baqillani and Imam ibn Fork, they don't resort to Greek philosophy at all. So I just want to understand this point because it's kind of important.
Yes. The Imam al-Ghazali in Munqidh min al-Dalalah, he says that the certainty is of the heart, it is not of the mind. So Greek logic is just something that, first of all, the conclusion follows from the premise. So whatever you assume, you cannot get more information out of the Greek syllogism. So whatever information is contained in the premises is already so what you assume, you cannot prove more than that. So basically you cannot start from a position of doubt about God and then come to yaqeen in God using any kind of Greek syllogism, because the conclusion cannot contain more information than is put in the axioms. So that is why you cannot come to certainty about God starting from doubt using syllogisms.
Jazakumullah khair. Okay, thank you.
So, any other questions?
I think, Dr. Sab, there aren't any questions.
All right.
So, if there aren't any questions, we can conclude today's session.
That's why I know I
think
say
there aren't
we
any.
should announce
So
that
just-
although originally it was meant to be 8 lectures, we are going to have one more lecture because the second and third part, and then we will have some more time for discussing the questions and answer on the whole course. So next session will be the last, inshallah. I think Lisa Listiana is raising her hand.
Please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Professor.
Wa alaikum
for
assalam.
the lecture. So, one question, Prof. So, as we know that the Western worldview claims to be universal, and they means that they avoid as you mentioned that they do not recognize the metaphysics. On the other hand, we as Muslim really have it is the important part of our belief. But my question is how to explain the non-metaphysics to non-Muslim. Because maybe they don't believe on it. Thank you.
Yes, this is a very good question. There is the Western social science is a big fraud and deception, and that is a serious problem because they claim that social science is consisting of universal truths about human beings, whereas it is only capturing the experience of the West. So this is a serious problem because they make these claims and then everybody is so impressed by the West that they say that it must be true and they are unable to challenge them. So that's why we have a problem because of the global colonization and conquest. People are so impressed that they are unable to see through the claims of social science that it is not a science. Social science is a study of human society. It can only apply to some society and it may not apply to others. So, like for example, the theory of economics says that every man seeks to maximize pleasure. This is not true. And so there are many other axioms of social science, foundations, which are simply false, but because of the huge impression of the West, the robe, because of their conquest of the world, everybody is so impressed that we cannot challenge these axioms. So otherwise, all of this social science is without any foundation. It is just the religion of Europe, made up to look like it is an objective fact. So once you understand that all of social sciences is just a religion of the West, it's the secular modern religion, then you are in better ground to attack and provide a replacement.
I mean that how to convince non-Muslim that there is a non-metaphysic things in this world. I mean.
Yes, this is actually not too difficult, but for the moment, I think the first place to convince is our own heart. Once our own heart arrives at this certainty that this social science is just a fraud and a deception, and then you can find ways to convince, because the conviction goes from heart to heart. It doesn't go from brain to brain. So whatever argument you make, it will not convince unless your heart is convinced. And once your heart is convinced, then this conviction will translate, will be carried to the other hearts. That's why the real target should be cleansing our own hearts of doubt. And that is a difficult problem. That is the one that we need to focus on. Yes, there is this question from 556-174-2708. I don't have a, yes.
Hello. Yes, Assalamu
Yes.
alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, how are you? Inshallah, hope everything is good. Alhamdulillah, very informative lecture. Sir, let me guide us about authentic translation of Imam Ghazali book Ihya Ulumuddin in English.
Yes.
Sir.
You want to find an authentic translation of Ihya Ulumuddin?
Yes, in English, yes.
I know that there are many, but I haven't any specific recommendations for which one is best.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you. I need in English, na? That's why I say in Arabic, no problem for me, but I want to read in English. Next time,
it is available. It's available, but I haven't examined the different translations to see which one is good.
Okay,
if
inshallah.
you search on the internet, you will find it.
Inshallah, inshallah. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Jazakumullah.
Okay. There was a question by Noha, where maybe she can come in to say it verbally.
I think there was a comment by her on the chat.
On the chat, yes. Noha, if you're there, why don't you make this comment on?
Assalamu alaikum, Professor. Thank you so much for this very interesting lecture. Actually, I for personal reasons, I just joined in and I missed the first step, but I'll read it, inshallah.
I see.
And as usual, I'll bother you by sending a note, of course. But for now, thank you. It was just a comment for Lisa. It's sort of a trivial comment, so I didn't want to share it up loud.
I see. All
Thank you, Professor. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. All right. So I think that.
Hi. So, Waksab, I think there are no more questions, so we can conclude this session for today.
Right.
Just a little announcement. Our next class could be the last session, and we'll have, like, I think half an hour for Dr. Saab's lecture, and then Dr. Saab has been gracious enough to accept that he'll give a short summary of the last 8 sessions that we have had with him. And also, I think we'll have some time to interact more openly with him, and we can ask any questions regarding all of the 9 lectures. So for that, if anyone has not get registered on the site, they can go and access all the previous lectures. They can see the videos of the past classes, and so let's see you all in the next class next week.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dr. Rasul. Thank you.
Wa alaikum assalam.